What's up, everybody? Jake here from Not Addicted. And then here with
CB. We here discuss Jake step 6 from his text. It's been very interesting over the past few months. Getting a lot of recognition, a lot of people recognizing the material. Even as I encounter different residents, they talk about the book that he written. But and I asked Jake previously, let's go through the steps because it's a lot of very lot of interesting material that's in there. And I want people to see, what we see, what we are experiencing. I believe that it can help a lot of people because he's not just going by what someone told him. He's going by lived experience up until this point. It's been how long, Jake?
it's going to be 11 years in September.
That's a long time for a person to be in recovery and be sober-minded. So I think what he can bring to the table can help assist others to be, for long-term sobriety also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, so like you said, we're on step 6, and step 6 reads like this: that I acknowledge that I can deliberately make bad decisions that come with bad consequences. And I put a little quote with it, and the quote is, everything happens for a reason. Sometimes the reason is, well, you were stupid and you made a bad decision.
Before you move forward a little bit further, at number 6, it says, I acknowledge that I can deliberately make bad decisions.
Deliberately.
Yes. Make bad decisions that come with bad consequences. You give us a little summary of that step right there.
Yeah, well, I put that in there because I notice a typical theme in the treatment world, and it's that if you engage in a behavior that leads to a negative consequence and you repeat it over and over and over again, it's usually looked at, well, it can't be you doing it. It's got to be some kind of disorder of some kind going on with you. Because no reasonable person would, at the end of the day, deliberately do something that keeps getting them a bad result over and over and over again. So I call this one kind of like my big mental health step. Because when we look at things with mental health, and as I call it, we pathologize a lot of normal behavior. And pathologize just means we medicalize. We put into medical terms or create diagnoses for what can be very normal kinds of behavior. I believe that a big thing that motivates an addict is ultimately the desire to feel good, or the desire to feel pleasure, if you will, And some people find this through things like exercise, Some people find this through taking a walk. Some people find pleasure in engaging in recreational activities, sports, and stuff like that. Whereas an addict will find the pleasure in substances. I don't think that constitutes then calling it a disease or a disorder. The only difference between the addict and the other individuals is ultimately you choose to go to substances while they choose to work out, or they choose to take a walk, or they choose to have engage in family activities and stuff like that.
I agree.
Gives them a sense of pleasure, gets them a sense of satisfaction. At this point for me, I choose to find that in going to work. I love what I do, the work that I do, and I get the same kind of feeling after I have a good group.
Right. That you did.
It's like the same kind of feeling that I got from when I was when I would do heroin.
Right.
And that, you know, where I decided to find this pleasure and this desire to feel good, that had to change when I got clean. In a sense, you know, some people, they knock the idea, or they say, oh, you just replaced this with that. Well, that's exactly what you're going to end up doing.
Well, you replace working with active using.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's your coping skill in reality.
Yeah. You know, you replace, while we were using, we replaced dedication to family with dedication to a substance. We replaced hard work. I mean, don't get me wrong, for some people it was hard work to maintain the substance abuse habit, but, you know, that's work that doesn't end in you know, gaining something good for it, so to speak.
Right, right.
And so I've always taken an issue with the fact that I believe addicts are very well aware of the potential consequences of their actions.
Right.
And that the results of them that they're getting, or the results they're getting, are not results that they want. I mean, this is reflected in their own statements, and they say things like, I don't know why I was doing it. Because this isn't where I wanted to be. This isn't what I want. Some people have said it like people want to get high. They didn't want to become an addict. Right. Well, I believe that every person should know at this point, especially in society and how pervasive the language on addiction is, that if you do that every day for a long period of time, you're going to become physically dependent.
Right.
You know,
especially with a drug like heroin.
Oh yeah, so you can't. You know, I don't buy the argument that it's like, well, I wanted to get high, but I didn't want to become an addict. Well, you knew that could potentially get there,
right? And
that it could potentially get to that point. And again, I don't think treatment does a good job at addressing this. I think all they do is they call this disease, they call it disorder, and
so why do you think they call it a disease? Right here, you say this idea was a root of developing the disease model of addiction.
Yes.
And maybe I should read the sentence beforehand. If a behavior leads to a negative consequence and is repeated regularly despite the consequences, then it must be a mental health disorder. Mm-hmm. And then the question, not the question, but the ideal. This ideal was at the root of developing the disease model of addiction.
Yeah, and that's why in the actual definition of addiction, they include the statement at the very end, you know, you do all this despite the negative consequences.
Okay.
And the only thing I can conclude about that is that people who don't understand the pull of drugs, the actual, you know, people who don't understand the feeling that something, for instance, like heroin gives, that in order to try and make sense of it, then, you know, we come up with, well, this disease and this disorder talk. You know, the actual definition of addiction reads like this, that it's a compulsive, relapsing brain disorder that's characterized by... it's a chronic relapsing brain disorder characterized by compulsive and involuntary drug seeking and using despite the negative consequences. And I've got a problem with that.
Because what's the problem you have with it?
The problem is you put in the end there, despite negative consequences, but you told me just in the sentence before that it's compulsive, which means it's forced.
Exactly.
And it's involuntary, which means you're not the one making the decision. And then you put at the very end, well, you do all that despite negative consequences. Well, that implies choice.
Right.
You know, it literally says all of this is done despite the negative consequence. Well, do I have a choice or not? Because the language, compulsive and involuntary, implies I don't have a decision in the matter.
But when you say in the beginning it's a choice, But this is the concept that I get from other people, and even in those who work in this field in substance abuse. That yes, it's a choice in the beginning, but after you cannot stop on your own, it's a disease. It's an addiction. So, what do you got to say about that right there?
No, I disagree with it. When I look at what the primary motivator for why I continued on with heroin for as long as I did, I didn't want to deal with withdrawal. The rules of addiction state if you want to feel good, you need to do it.
Right.
That's what the rules of addiction state. They state that if you don't do it for a certain amount of time, you're going to end up dealing with withdrawal. I didn't want to deal with that.
Right. Right.
However, I knew this, that getting sober in today's world is a very easy thing to do.
Right.
It's literally a phone call away. For some places, it's just a stop into the emergency room. It's a trip to jail for a period of time, and there you go, you've gotten sober.
Right.
It's the only thing, the only quote unquote disease that if you stop engaging in this certain type of behavior, then the symptoms of it go away.
Right.
At least the physical symptoms, right?
The mental don't go anywhere.
You can argue that some people are mentally addicted to it, but again,
Right.
I don't think this is the result of some kind of disease or disorder. The fact is, every day I go about my life
Right.
keeping myself from making bad decisions, as I believe everybody else does.
Right.
There's sometimes, CB, you do groups. There's sometimes in those groups where people are acting stupid, and you just want to, you just really want to lay into them. But that would be a bad decision because you'd most likely lose your job.
Right. Right.
And so we keep
Consequence.
Yes,
Negative
there's a consequence to that. So I'm not going to say that if I did that, well, I couldn't help myself. Of course I could.
Yeah.
The way that I look at it is, and for those watching here at the facility that we work at, we have an open door. You can leave if you want to, but the consequences are going to be bad if you decide to, leave.
Definitely gonna be a negative consequence.
Oh yeah, and most people they got prison time over their head.
Right.
And
right.
So I look at it like, if you are able to, in the face of that every day, and you're able to make the decision to stay here,
Okay.
then, why can't you apply that same kind of thing that gives you the ability to do that to the substance use?
I got an idea of what you're saying is just like we make everyday choices, right?
Mm-hmm.
No matter how serious or how important it is for this choice, we know that the best choice is, like you said, with a situation, when you encounter a negative resident or anything, not just even here at the facility, but you can be at the store or something. Mm-hmm. How you respond to it, it's a choice.
Yeah.
I can respond negatively or I can respond positively.
Yeah. They say it like this, between the event and your response to it is a moment where you get to decide how you respond to it.
Right.
You can either act out and just run with the emotion that you got.
Right.
Or you can take a breather for a second, take a step back and think about what's going on.
That'd
and
be
weigh
the
out
best.
what would be the best course of action.
Right.
And I believe there was not a day when I was a heroin user that I woke up saying, I don't know if I'm going to use today.
You knew you was going to use
I knew I was going to do it. And I knew I would do anything to get it. I would wake up every morning planning it out. I got the money? I got to work today, so I got to make sure that I go to this guy before this time so that I have it for when I go to work. Equally, while I was high,
right.
this is going to be an extreme example, but I'll just, use it because it's extreme.
Okay.
And it makes a point. Even when I was high, for instance, I knew that I could hurt people.
In what way?
Well,
When you say
physically.
hurt? Physically.
Physically.
Okay.
When I was high. I knew that I'm high and I have the ability, you're in a kitchen. You got a bunch of instruments you could use to cause
Yeah.
harm to somebody.
Okay.
But yet I didn't do that. I would never do that.
Right. Right.
I believe that addicts have lines that they would not cross.
Right. Right.
And those lines were in place even while they were high.
You're right.
Ultimately, I believe that substances, in a lot of ways, the only way that I would give that idea that like an addict, it turns into a disease, they can do nothing of it besides getting help.
Right.
The only way that I could say that that's true is if I didn't believe that I could do anything about the problem. That's the only way that would be true. That's just not a true statement in the sense
Right.
that the vast majority of addicts, they quote unquote hit rock bottom.
Right.
And yet in that rock bottom state, when arguably maybe they're coming off a massive bender, or maybe, they've been using for years and years and years and years and years, and they finally get to a point of where they decide to be clean and get clean.
Right.
Well, if it's true that an addict can't help themselves, then how is it possible for somebody in the throes of addiction to be able to make the decision to stop and check themselves into a treatment center?
You're right.
And so it's like I've been having a lot of talks with a lot of people, and it's one of the common things that does pop up is that whole idea. Well, they can't help themselves. Well, I just think that's not true.
Right.
They totally can, and they know they can. It's
So-
just they may not want to.
So basically, you saying, just like the everyday choices we make, an addict can also make that choice that I'm done. I don't want to get high anymore.
If you can make the decision to stay clean, when people say, well, it's
Right.
easy to do that in certain environments. Well, no, because people go out on probation when they leave here.
Right.
And they stay clean while they're on their probations, more often than not. And I look at it like this. If you can decide to be clean for the sake of a system that you claim to hate so much, the criminal justice system,
Right.
and you can be clean while you're on paper, or you got a tether on, and so it's like, okay, I can't do it because I don't want to get caught, then you've got the decision to, stop. People need the right motivators. And ultimately, I don't think disease and disorder are any kind of motivator at all. I don't think I don't think treatment ultimately does too good of a job of getting people motivated, especially when we tell you all you can do is cope with this problem, and you can't actually start living again,
Right. 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 So all about making that choice. I mean, that's the same thing I did.
Yeah.
That's what you did.
Again,
right?
every person who has ever gotten clean has all said the same thing. I don't want to do this anymore.
So it's all about making up your mind. What do you want to do?
Yeah, there's actually.
How do a person get to that point?
Ooh, well, that's.
I know it's a
that's
personal
the
choice,
tricky part,
but-
man.
But
I don't think.
how did you get to that point?
Well,
And I asked you that before in
Yeah.
the past.
I mean, I've said it like this. I mean, I got to that point because I made a good decision when it was right, when the proper motivation was there. The day I got clean, I woke up saying, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. 5 minutes before I had that switch flip, I was planning on getting it. And I wish I could say that there was some kind of process to it, but ultimately, making that decision and getting to that point, it's not a process. It's a realization
Oh, okay, at that moment, what did you realize?
that I've been stupid.
Okay, what prompted that? I guess what I'm looking for is what actually prompted you at that moment to come up with that decision, that choice that you made, man, that changed your life to where you are now.
In a lot of ways, not everyone's going to be able to relate to it, nor is everyone going to be able to do it. Because I believe that I had the big man upstairs on my side.
Okay.
And that,
Your faith played
oh yeah,
a great part.
yeah. That's what people don't understand is the entire time that I was doing this stuff, I always had the moral conviction that I
Right.
shouldn't be doing this. What about what you believe over here in the book that says
Right,
you
right.
shouldn't be living this way? What
Right,
about that?
Right.
And so my realization came when, throughout my addiction, I would try to avoid any conversation about faith.
Right.
I would try to avoid any type of conversation about it because I knew how it would make me feel. It would make me feel guilt, as well as shame
Right,
about
right.
who I had become.
You
And I
didn't want to
didn't-
feel
I
that
didn't
way
wanna
while you
feel
was
that
doing
way.
what you was doing.
But there came a point where it was unavoidable to feel that way.
Okay.
And the thing that did it for me was, I was on my way to work and I plug in an old CD that I had this old CD case, had an S10 truck at the time, and a CD
Okay.
case with a bunch of, CDs that I had burned off of LimeWire. And one I had completely unlabeled. And so I threw that into the CD player because I saw that it had stuff on it. And I threw that into the CD player, and it was a bunch of old Christian and gospel songs that I had listened to.
Okay.
And first one that came on was Chris Tomlin's "How Great Is Our God," and as soon
Right.
as I heard that, again the switch just flipped. And I did what I knew I could have done a long time ago. I started calling treatment. And went to the first place that said that they can get me in the next day.
So you knew you had to detox.
Oh yeah, I had to detox. Going to detoxing is different than going to treatment.
Right.
It's just different. Detoxes will get rid of the physical dependency. I thought that was my biggest
And that was to
problem.
get the narcotic, that substance out of your system.
Yeah, that's what I was most afraid of. I didn't want to go through detox. I was afraid of facing that music of withdrawal.